Can we start? The conflict, the forgotten conflicts and crisis is a panel right now, and I think can be very interesting. But my friends from NGIC asked me, can we finish that within 1 hour? And which means that we have to be very disciplined in our comments and thoughts, and to understand that we have to respect rules. Anyway, we are living in the world which is defined by two conflicts nowadays: war in Ukraine and war between Israel and Hamas. But many people are forgetting the other conflicts that are existing even today. Just to mention, can you hear me?
Can you speak a little bit louder?
Louder?
Yay!
Maybe I can bring the equipment closer to me. It's going to be better than to lose a voice. Can you hear me right now? Okay. What is a very sad fact about the world nowadays is that evidence of the existing conflicts in the world. Global Peace Index is a very interesting institution which is from 2008, analyzing the conflicts, current and potential conflicts in the world. And the key results of the analysis right now are very sad and very specific. Conflicts in Gaza and Ukraine were the primary drivers of the global fall of peacefulness and battle that reached 162,000 victims. 92 countries are currently involved in the conflicts beyond their borders, more than any time since the inception of the Global Peace Index, 2008. The global economic impact of violence increased to 19.1 trillion in 2023, representing 13.5% of global GDP. Militarization recorded its largest yearly deterioration since the inception of Global Peace Index, with 108 countries becoming more militarized. 110 million people are either refugees or internally displaced persons due to violent conflict, with 16 countries now hosting more than 500,000 refugees. Those figures are telling us that we are living in a militarized world, which means we are preparing for more conflicts. Conflicts are becoming something natural, the fact with which we are living. Casualties and deaths are something that we are starting to ignore, except in the countries that are totally involved in the conflicts or countries that were involved in the conflicts recently. Situation is getting worse and worse every year. Now we are talking about nuclear war. Many countries are buying the weapon. Many entities are thinking about how to increase their defense industry and production, and to modernize that field of the economy. many technological impacts we have in defense industry right now, which can increase efficiency of the weapon in the future, but also to create more connections and between real economy and defense industry, and to create economy more and more depend on defense industry in the future. What is concerning me very much right now is that situation where the social aspect of many, many different societies. Now in the global arena, we are talking about angels and the killers. We are talking about countries that are on the side of the humanism and the countries that are on the side of criminalism. We are talking about dividing the world, dividing societies. I am coming from Serbia, which was involved in a conflict in former Yugoslavia. And fighting regime in that time, Milosevic regime in that time, I was also witnessing how global arena, global politics is simplifying things, creating devils and angels in a very simple way, which is not in accordance with the reality. And this is why I'm here to try to moderate this panel in a specific way. Let me right now start a discussion about our panel today, and to ask my friend Valdis to take the floor.
Thank you, Boris. It is a very difficult topic to talk about, forgotten conflicts. If we have forgotten something, it's out of our agenda today. So I think one of the reasons is to put back these forgotten conflicts to our agenda. If we use this word forgotten, some of the conflicts are forgotten because they have seen solution and sustainable solution, you know. I apologize if I use wrong, let's say, situations and wrong countries to illustrate what I mean, you know. Let's see the conflict between Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland. We have forgotten because this is not more relevant today. Solution is sustainable, you know. The same time, if you go to another area, civil war in Sri Lanka, Tamil Tigers, you know. We have forgotten because that's gone. This is one group of conflicts, and that's good that we have sustainable solutions and we have the opportunity to forget about them. Then we have to understand that behind every conflict is some historical sentiment. And each nation and in ethnic group or religious group have these historical sentiments which create conflicts or might create conflicts. Because every country, or let's say nation, has a sensitive date. For example, my country, it's the year 1940, when we were occupied by Soviet army, you know. Let's say for Austrians, maybe a positive opposite, 1955, restoration of Austrian state. So every country has something very sensitive in their history that might lead to possible conflicts in the future. There are also some conflicts that seems to be solved, you know, like in your case in Balkans, Kosovo, you know. But are we sure that it's sustainable settlement of Kosovo problem? Yes and no, because the possible tensions may arise someday. At the same time, you know, the conflict between Serbia and Croatia, it's nearly impossible to say today. So we have a lot of things under these forgotten conflicts. So to be a little bit devil's advocate, I would say, you know, if you go deeper in the history, you know, Sweden was involved with Denmark, you know, British were in war with Spain, French with Germany.
If I may, I think when we were writing this issue of forgotten conflicts, it was related to the notion that the UN is counting that right now there are ongoing 51 conflicts around the world.
Yep.
The media covers basically two major conflicts right now, the Middle East and Ukraine. Barely we're beginning to hear about Sudan, but look at the Sahel, look at Somalia, look at it. So there's a lot of other conflicts that are somehow not on the attention radar of the world, not the historically resolved ones. That was the key point. What do we do about all these other ones which are also undermining food security, undermining all sorts of other possibilities and humanitarian aid throughout mostly the developing world?
Yes, you're absolutely right. And it's a bit, we have to learn from our history. If you don't learn from the history, you will never solve and prevent any conflicts, because it's very important. So, but then we have, I will go to the circle of empathy, which, created, this term is created by Adam Smith, by the way, So we have empathy around ourselves to some extent about the people or the countries we really know. If we don't know, we don't care. And why we are forgotten a lot of these conflicts you mentioned, that's because we don't care. I'm very sorry to say that, we have forgotten those who were in our history. It's normal, it's good, but we have forgotten those who are going on because we don't care, because the circle of empathy is too small. And I was in a situation then somebody was really excited that, Europe cares about Ukraine, but they don't care about an African Horn or somewhere else, Yes, that's true. But very important that in this circle of empathy, the neighbors really care about the conflict. And the neighbors are not becoming allies to one side or another side, which is characteristic to all these conflicts we have today. The conflicting parties try to get some allies, to make stronger, to win. Basically, we need to act in an opposite way. We have to, come together, the neighbors of the region, and decide how we can end this conflict. Not to just turn this conflict into a proxy war. So, because when we need solutions, and prevention is very important. The prevention was mentioned here a couple times. How we can prevent? By enlarging this circle of empathy, that means information, being together. And there should be a lot of these circles around the globe, in each region. If the region doesn't care too much, the rest of the world will not care at all. That's true. That's absolutely true. That's a human nature, and we cannot change it, And basically why it's happening. We have selfish interests. The neighbors, all neighbors in all conflicts have selfish interests. If you remember Afghanistan, there were selfish interests of the neighbors, They never came together, to discuss how to get away of these selfish interests and work towards the regional interests to bring sustainable peace. I say it again, it's very difficult to talk about these topics. And there's no question why they are not on our agenda. We don't talk too much about this because the big conflicts like Ukraine, like Gaza, they are on the front pages, and the rest is minorities. Oh, they will do themselves. I don't have any answer good on that question. I'm pretty pessimistic about that unless, the circle of empathy is larger in every region. That's the only solution, Sorry for being too historical, Thank you very much.
Thank you, Valdis. I think that this is very important to be historical right now, not to talk too long, but to be historical. Otherwise, we are going to somehow ignore the problems we are going to be faced in the recent future. Just to remind ourselves, we have 56 conflicts in the world nowadays. 92 countries are involved in those conflicts, which means half of the world is involved in the conflicts. That means we are living in an extremely dangerous period of the human history. We are really on the crossroad, and we have to think about this very carefully. Right now, I'm asking Amre Moussa to take the floor.
Thank you, our dear moderator. In fact, I want to say a few words first about the Pact for the Future and the very rich debate that has taken place this morning. I am preparing myself to read it word by word. That's why I got the text in English and in Arabic, and intended to have a full weekend to go through it. The issue of implementation, of course, jumps immediately before our eyes. How would it be implemented? And another question would be, okay, that's fine. What about if the results of the American elections would bring a new policy that would discard such documents altogether? What are we going to do? So this is an assumption that is possible to take place. That is one. Two, also those who refer to the need for a pact for the present, and in order to consider both of them together, the pact for the present and another one for the future. But I wish to praise the Secretary General, Guterres, for his initiative in convening the Summit of the Future. A good discussion, an effort that had to be undertaken, but there are a lot of fog in the international situation that would make it perhaps difficult to put all the hopes that have been expressed in this pact to put it into implementation. Then I come to the issue of this panel, the forgotten and unforgotten conflicts. And I see no difference. What have we done? What have we achieved with the unforgotten, which are occupying the newspapers and the media, etc.? Everybody was speaking about Ukraine and about Palestine and Gaza, to no avail, which is the same result of the other 50 or 60 forgotten, so-called forgotten conflicts. Some questions jump in front of my eyes. Who decided to have such conflicts forgotten? Forgotten by whom? By international media. The conflicts that have the headlines, those are the unforgotten. Those who don't have headlines, those are the forgotten. So it is a decision of those who manipulate the international media. Another question: are all those forgotten, so-called forgotten conflicts are of the same degree? Or they are first class, second class, third class? Another question: what is the role of this or that big country in provoking a conflict in this and that region or that region? And what are the numbers of forgotten conflicts that have came because of regional or national reasons, and the others that have been provoked and in fact planned? I have in mind the Palestinian question. A year ago, or until a year ago, and for so many years, efforts have been undertaken to remove the Palestinian question from the table of attention and to remove the military occupation from the cadre of attention. That was planned for that problem, that crisis, that conflict to be forgotten. Because this was so fragile a policy and so superficial a policy, it took half an hour to bring back the whole thing into the table, into the cadre of attention. So yes, the forgotten is an issue that has to be deeply considered. It is not that easy to say this is just forgotten, what should we do? Because if we should not do, others will do. If the international community doesn't do, organizations will do. Of course, there are a lot of conspiracies around, a lot of stories about the issue of 7th of October and so on, but that was the natural result of a very severe military occupation of the Palestinian lands. There was a justification for the Palestinians to reject, to revolt, and to do whatever they can. And we cannot just talk about bloodshed of the 7th of October, but we have to talk about the bloodsheds that have been taking place for years and years in the West Bank as well as in Gaza. Therefore, it is a case-by-case issue, not a general rule to say those are forgotten, those are the unforgotten, black and white. That is a wrong approach, in my opinion. Yesterday, President Lula of Brazil, in his intervention before the General Assembly, he raised the issue of conflicts in Latin America. We in Africa have serious problems, crisis situations in the Sahel, the Great Lake area, and in the Horn of Africa, as well as in other parts of the continents. We don't consider them as forgotten, even if the international media decided not to mention them or not to mention some few ideas, few news about them. But we in Africa are very much aware of them. We talk about them. We try to intervene and solve them and help the people in those regions. Therefore, the forgotten will have to be, the term forgotten will have to be discussed. We have to be explained. What is forgotten in the eyes of international media is not forgotten in the continental media. It's not forgotten at all, because it has its results in refugees, in displaced, in killed, and so many other ills, addressing the children, the women, the old, and everybody else. So I challenge the term forgotten. It doesn't have one meaning or one interpretation. Some are forgotten because of the pressures and the plans, the sinister plans of some countries, and others are emanating from the conditions in a country or in a region, and some of them have confusion because they are forgotten by the countries around and by a full continent, major continent like Africa, while in the eyes of certain international powers, those are forgotten or to be forgotten. back to the Palestinian problem, the situation in the Middle East, I would say that also there were efforts to cover up and not to put everything to the media. And I here would wish to praise many parts of the international media because they refused to succumb to such a pressure and continued to inform the public of what is going on in Gaza, destruction, killing, and all the story that we all know. And here, I wish, in this very enlightened society of good people and former presidents and high-level officials, I wish to praise South Africa, the Republic of South Africa, for bringing Israel to the International Court of Justice with the accusation, serious accusation of committing the crime of genocide, to which the International Court of Justice answered and cautioned Israel that the crime of genocide is a major war crime that requires punishment. The South African action, in fact, has kind of saved the international system because the Security Council was totally paralyzed. It couldn't live up to its responsibility in maintaining international peace and security, to the extent that the Security Council couldn't adopt a resolution, a ceasefire resolution, more than a ceasefire resolution. So they kept the bombardment and killing, etc., going on and on and on. Also, humanitarian resolutions were delayed. So the system was crumbling. For the International Court of Justice to be brought in and resorted to is a positive point in favor of the international system. Saving the international system, international multilateral system, the system based on the Charter of the United Nations. This is what should be done when we talk about forgotten and unforgotten. And I see that you are about to tell me something, Boris. So I stop here anyway, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Amre. Just to refer on what you've said, this is very important. Forgotten conflict can be put under pressure or to be somehow ignored, but after many years can explode once again in a brutal form. This is something that we have to take into consideration. Thank you for your comments. Right now I'm asking Ehud Barak to take the floor.
I would like to concentrate on the global picture for a moment. I think that we won't be able to find any way to deal with the forgotten conflicts if we do not look at it through the glasses of the overall global system. Because in order to be able to pacify genuine conflicts, as mentioned here, everyone has his memories and his kind of past catastrophes that encourage you to fight against a neighbor. You need, at the upper level of strategy, either a very deep understandings and agreements between the main powers on earth, supposedly could be expressed in the UN Security Council, but not really successfully, or alternative, a delicate balance of power that controls the enthusiasm of each side to encourage conflict. I think that we are facing now clearly to the emerging of an axis made of China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, and on the other side, the United States, the European, Western Europe, like-minded countries like Canada or Australia and New Zealand, the Sunnite autocracies in the Middle East, and hopefully India. There is a dream to have India into this, which is not very simple. And both are focusing already on three very subtle and complicated conflicts. One is Ukraine, we have heard today. The other is Gaza, we have heard just from our Moussa. And the third one, probably a little bit into the future, Taiwan. And these three conflicts suffice to draw the whole attention of these two axes and leave no diplomatic and mental attention to deal with the other 56 or 59 conflicts. I think that when we look at it, we see basically these two axes compete for hegemony on the world arena. And I want to draw attention to two mistakes that I think, or mistake and a half, that the Americans are doing in this regard as the leaders of our side, so to speak, side of enlightenment, liberal democracy, and so on. The first one is the way they treat China. The emergence of China as a major power in the world in this coming century is unstoppable. It's just a kind of childish illusion to think that you can manage somehow to push them to the corners. To those who watch the details of the fight now for AI, for quantum computing, for control of space, it's you cannot block them from turning into a major power. But the Americans drew it to a point where they look at it as an inevitable war. I read Harvard professor Graham Ellison wrote a whole book. They took it in a strap, kind of predicting that it's inevitable, that there will be a physical military clash. I think that such prophecies become kind of self-fulfilling ones, and it encourages an unbalanced look at China. China in history with millennia never look at itself as imperial in the sense of the British Empire, where the sun never sets down on the empire. And even when someone conquered them, like Mongolians or Manchurians, they swallowed it like a macrophage, not attacking or counterattack or going to conquer the world. I think that they have very tough, painful lessons from what happened in Ukraine. If Putin could not cross about 150 kilometers from Belarus to Kiev, as he planned, and he's stuck after 2.5 years with being unable to win over Ukraine, that's a painful lesson for China. They have to cross the Strait of Taiwan over the surface, mainly with the modern missiles and weapons that America can easily supply to them as defensive weapons. And she should have listened to the lesson that Putin got from the failure of generals in a corrupt society that never fought a war, to be those who giving him a national assessment of the chances of winning a war. But that's only a part of it. I think that the right way to look at China is to see it at the same time as a rival. Of course they are a rival, as a competitor, but also as a partner. There is, even now, when we are talking some $6 trillion of trade between China and the United States, you cannot ignore it without shooting at your own leg. But that's one grave mistake. The other is not exactly a mistake. It stems out from the very nature of the American attitude. We all believe, as I mentioned, in liberal democracy and the great ideas of enlightenment and so on. But in the competition for the kind of locking into your sphere the global south, it's not effective. Because the Americans, with their emphasis on democracy and as a precondition for pacification, it's a conventional wisdom since Immanuel Kant, that democracies will not fight each other. But the road to there is very complicated. Because for the Russians and the Chinese, or especially the Chinese, when they approach a government anywhere in the world, They do not never try to educate them, to tell them how to run their own business, to tell them how to control their own people. They leave it to them. They understand, of course, that it's cynical and Machiavellian or whatever, but they have no dissonance cognitive about it. It makes them much more effective. The American approach, on the one hand, promising what you have in the future if you manage to go through all these kind of way towards liberal modern democracy, but along the time, they appear to be intervening in a brutal way in the right of every sovereign, probably established in Westphalia in the 17th century, to every sovereign to define his own religion as well as his own internal structures. That's not a mistake, but it's something limited that should be given attention. All in all, I'm not optimist, because when you look at the reasons why the hell it succeeded, give and take, after World War II, it succeeded in spite of the critique that you might find from the same guy, from the Russians, Chinese, so on, that basically it was Pax Americana disguised as a rule-based world order. And they noticed that in the Western Hemisphere, America allowed itself to take action that it will not accept if it would have come from someone else. I remember some morning in China, in the southeast provinces of China, when I saw two Sukhois taking off from some new Air Force base. And in a few hours, it became clear that they had almost a clash with the American reconnaissance airplane looking for vessels around Hainan, some 200 miles from the shore. And when I asked a week later the leaders in Beijing, what the hell? Why do they? It was not even dangerous, not even weaponized aircraft, some reconnaissance, electronic reconnaissance. They say, close your eyes and try to imagine what would have been happening if we would send our reconnaissance airplanes to fly 200 miles from the Bay Area in San Francisco, even 1,000 miles from America in the Panama Canal. So there is argument who is a kind of more consistent, and we are not in a good position in this debate when you look at it from the eyes of those leaders of the global South. It's in many cases preferable to join hands with China and the other axes. Now, so I'm not optimistic because it will take time. It was mentioned here how to deal with kids at the age of 3. So that takes the rhythmus of education. It's something different from what we are discussing here. You have to do it, but it's not something practical to these kind of discussions because it doesn't have any impact before a generation passes. And I didn't mean that you don't have to do it. Very important, but will not impact what we are discussing now.
But would have impacted had you done it years ago.
Yeah, of course. If we have started it a generation ago, now we would have seen the results.
Why didn't you?
Now, one remark regard to Amre Moussa comment about genocide. I think that, of course, there is a real problem. The Palestinian issue is a big elephant in the room, in the Middle East, in any discussion. We have to think of it all the ways, never lose sight while fighting against terror, never lose sight of the need at a certain point to reach an agreement. But it takes one side to impose a war. It takes two to tango and to peace. And that's here, Tzipi made a huge effort. I tried my best. Olmert tried. Rabin tried. Even Netanyahu at a certain point appeared to be trying to make peace. It never took off. But that's diplomacy. I want to talk about the genocide. I think that whoever had the patience to look into the details of this barbarian attack of 7th of October should still be shocked by the nature of this attack, which was did with hands, slaughtering people, burning them, killing children in front of their parents, or the parents in front of the children, raping, mutilating. Terrible, terrible. The worst day in the history of the Jewish state and the worst day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. So there were many Gazans which were not involved in it that were killed, but it was after, for 7 or 8 days, we rained them with leaflets, we called them on the radio, we called them on their mobile phones, we called them in a public TV and told them, leave Gaza Strip. We are going to hit it very harsh. Leave Gaza Strip, go to the other side. We will not hurt you while you are going there. And those who stayed there stayed under a handgun to the temple by the Hamas. Hamas does not hesitate, never hesitated to use his own population as a human shield. And basically, they do not really care about the loss of life of Palestinians. So I cannot tell you that, I think that most Israelis are extremely not happy of the fact that so many Palestinians were dead, which were not really involved, but that could not change the overall picture, and I don't believe that Israel could seriously blame for genocide in this case. The whole conflict is going from bad to worse as we are talking, and it's not yet clear how a full regional war will be avoided. I still hope that will somehow happen, but just I wanted to mention this about genocide. I don't believe that Israel deserves this description.
Thank you, Ehud. Thank you very much. Thank you for talking about not only forgotten and conflicts and crises, but also for potential conflicts. One of the most important potential conflicts is between China and the United States. South and Eastern China Sea is one of the most sensitive areas in the world nowadays. It's going to be in the next few decades, for sure, but unfortunately, we don't have enough time to discuss all those issues seriously. I think this is one of the most interesting panels, but within 1 hour, we have to discuss everything. This is mission impossible. But anyway, right now, I'm asking Melanne Verveer to take the floor.
Thank you so much, Boris, and I would like to change the perspective, but one that is absolutely integral to our discussion. And that is to remind us at the outset that 25 years ago, the United Nations Security Council adopted Security Council Resolution 1325 that recognized that women bear a disproportionate burden during conflict, but also play an indispensable role in peace and security. They are not just victims, but essential to prevention, to conflict resolution, to negotiations, and to relief and recovery from conflict. That resolution has been strengthened over the years 9 times by 9 subsequent resolutions to continue to put a focus where it needs to be. This framework should be integrated into all conflict solutions and certainly into the discussion that we are having today. The Prosecutor General of Ukraine mentioned conflict-related sexual violence. Women in Ukraine are working across all areas in defending their country, but certainly also documenting conflict-related sexual violence. Women in Sudan have recently finally had a breakthrough with the mediator to be consulted on future discussions there. And yesterday I spent time with women peace leaders from Israel and Palestine. And I must say they are brave and courageous in trying to bridge the divide. We have a conflict or a war that seemingly was put to an end. But Afghanistan has gone back to war, and that is a war that continues today on the Afghan women. The Taliban has been engaging in a systematic oppression of the women there. Since taking power, they have issued over 100 edicts regulating every aspect of an Afghan woman's life. In recent weeks, they put more fuel on the fire and released a 114-page codification of laws on the so-called promotion of virtue and prevention of vice. The Taliban are creating a society of gender apartheid, erasing women's rights across the board, covering their bodies, including their faces, not enabling them to speak in public, whether singing, reciting, or reading. Already they cannot work, they cannot go to school, they cannot even appear in public spaces. 2 decades of progress for women and girls is being eradicated. And no wonder suicide rates there are rising, particularly among young girls. The international community must not look away and turn its back on these crimes. I believe we need to engage with the Taliban, certainly on the provision of critical humanitarian relief because the situation is grim. But to normalize this would be an additional crime. And to award recognition of the Taliban for this would go even farther. I have learned today that 4 countries have just come together and announced that they have notified the Afghan government of their intention to hold the Taliban accountable for violating the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, to which Afghanistan is a signatory. And this could eventually lead to proceedings at the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. But these are ways in which the world can continue and must continue to understand what is happening there, and we must find appropriate ways to advance accountability. And the other conflict I want to mention is a growing conflict, one that we're not exactly paying attention to until it truly gets worse. Everyday climate change is creating more climate refugees, displaced by extreme heat, flooding, droughts, loss of arable land, and loss of livelihoods, exacting a greater toll in the global south, particularly on women. But given the tools for adaptation and mitigation, they can be excellent problem solvers. This displacement is leading to new conflicts. There's a strong connection between climate, gender, and conflict. We are seeing climate change fueling violence and displacement with competition for diminishing resources. In Lake Chad Basin, for example, a report released yesterday at the United Nations documented growing climate displacement leading to ever greater numbers of refugees from Central America. Disputes over water rights in countries like Nigeria are bringing confrontation over land resources, and there are growing conflicts between farmers and herders. And countries already enduring conflict and war today are also disproportionately affected by climate change. We already know that climate change is a threat multiplier. With these new conflicts, there is yet more reason for us to act with urgency on climate change and to work on COP29 so that it can be responsive and prevent these growing crises by our actions that need to be taken on climate. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. We are always thinking about conflicts in the context of the war between states. But you underlined the very specific importance of conflict between the state and the half of the population of the state, women, which is very important. Sometimes we have a segregation in terms of racism in the countries, segregation in terms of elderly and the young population, but we have to take this into consideration really, really very seriously. Right now I'm asking Joyce, Banda to take the floor. Please.
Thank you. First, let me thank the co-chair and the organizing committee for the invitation to come to Baku. This is a place where we come and we express ourselves freely. Allow me, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, to talk about the forgotten conflicts. For me, I wasn't very sure I would come and talk about this diplomatically, but my chair spoke about it. These two distinguished sons of Africa have talked about this ably, and I think it's very important for me to echo what they have said. As far as I am concerned, these conflicts in Africa are not forgotten. The conflicts are set aside. The conflicts are ignored. The international community has decided which conflicts to focus on, to highlight. The rest of them don't matter. It was just a few months ago, I served as a trustee on the First Lady's Peace Council in Abuja, in Africa. And we have entered into an agreement with the United States Institute for Peace. And I was coming to the United States with those ladies to sign an agreement and found groups of people from Sudan. They had traveled all the way to the United States to ask whether their conflict doesn't mean anything. And as the co-chair have said, thousands and thousands of people have died in Sudan and continue to die. This is the conflict that you don't even hear about. I went to the African Union, where I serve on several committees. The women were hanging onto my clothes. Why don't you come to Sudan and hear us out and see what is happening? See the devastation and the killing of innocent people. I would like to ask, why must we stand by as a global community and watch people die in Gaza, women, children, men, even including medical doctors? Why must children in Israel die playing and dancing in the night and they're slaughtered? Why must people die in Africa? What is the future generation going to say about us who stood by and watched all this death taking place? Me, I don't care whether it's a Jew or it's a Palestinian or it's an African. It's all death and must be treated equally, and the attention must be paid. And we must do that urgently, right now. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I am a grain ambassador for Ukraine. I was appointed about two years ago with 3 Africans who helped identify countries that are desperately need grain. So as a result of that, I started watching what is happening in Ukraine, and very much wondered why Ukraine cannot enter into discussions with Russia around peace. And in February, I came to the US for the National Prayer Breakfast and met several women from Ukraine. We had a meeting, and it was the first time I began to understand that conflict. And they were very clear to me to say, no, you're talking to the wrong people. You should be talking to the aggressor, and the aggressor is not Ukraine. The aggressor is Russia. So the question that I have is, why is it okay, again, why is it okay that people are dying and we seem to be helpless? We don't know what to do. We sit there and watch people die in their schools all over the world, and Africa included. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as for Africa, I have asked, I have looked, and I watched what is causing all these conflicts. Some of them are man-made because they're selfish people, they're greedy people from all over the world scrambling for the natural resources of Africa. And when they come into Africa, they want to loot those resources. They go into agreements with the selfish, greedy indigenous people, and they begin to loot there is a Thabo Mbeki report at the African Union that shows that $109 billion is leaving Africa every year. They come, you go into some African countries, there's actually an airstrip, a plane lands at night, load our diamonds and gold, and fly out. This is what some countries are fighting about, because younger people are saying enough is enough. So when we see coups on the continent of Africa, some of us used to be very much against them. But now when you look closely, it is frustration. People are watching those of us who become leaders, selfish and greedy, stealing from ourselves. Younger leaders are saying enough is enough and rising against our countries. So looting of our resources is also causing these conflicts. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the last one that I have is climate change, as the distinguished last speaker talked about. You find that in some African countries, drought, people with animals will move into land that is not theirs, and then fights start. So internal conflicts are being caused by that. But one that has also just become evident is the fact that some of us African leaders are selling our land to foreigners to come and open estates. Some countries have already sold 10% of their countries. This is what is causing conflicts, because they are displacing people inside in order to create that space to sell, and then people are remaining without land. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, another problem that we are finding is, somebody said, on the continent of Africa, there's 60% of our people being young people. Young people that have no hope. Young people that have no jobs. Young people that are struggling, and they are raising their voices and warning us leaders in state houses. We want opportunities. This is what we want you to do. In their desperation, they go and cross the Mediterranean and drown. If they are lucky, they get to the other end and they get abused, or they go country by country and end up in xenophobic attacks. The question that they are having is, where are our leaders? And I've said to my fellow leaders on the continent, do something about the situation. The same natural resources you are exploiting and selling off with people from outside, you could build your economies and create opportunities and jobs for your people, especially young people, so that they don't leave their land, because that is one other reason why there's a lot of conflict and fighting on the continent of Africa. I want to finish by saying that I cannot leave this stage without talking about the effect of climate change and the calamities on the people of Africa. And I was angry for the longest time. I insisted for the longest time that we, Africa, only cause 3% of the damage. And out of that 3%, 50% is Egypt and South Africa. So the rest of us next to zero. But we are the ones now being affected most by this climate change. I have watched my country in 4 years face cyclones back to back, 4 cyclones. I have stood there and watched a whole village swept away. Things that have never happened before. I have spent the last 18 months giving out relief to 100,000 families, building houses for people that have lost their homes. The question that I have is, I didn't know then, I know now. The greatest effect of these cyclones and calamities on ordinary people is mental health, mental problems. I went into one area where a whole village was swept away. I found a woman there. She tells me, I stepped aside to go to the latrine. When I came back, the house is not there, my husband is gone, and my 5 children are gone. And she was laughing. And straight away it hit me that it can't be normal. And I only got to learn that that's what it's doing on the minds of the people. I wish Dr. Tedros was here. And I just want to say to my chair, this must be an issue that we will discuss in Baku. The issue of health, the issue of mental health on people that are being affected by climate change. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Joyce. This is one of the...
Boris, if I may, we have a very special visitor, Dennis Francis, President of the General Assembly, former President. Okay, former President. You've handed in your, but you still have a lot to do over there. He came specifically to see us, and so I propose that we give him a chance to intervene because he has to rush back.
Okay.
And we're very grateful for your being here. Please, Dennis. Your words of wisdom.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to begin, first of all, by greeting my colleagues and saying that I wish I could spend the entire 2 days with you, but for the fact that a very tight schedule summons me in other places. The subject of discussion, I believe, is the number of forgotten conflicts that exist in the world. I want to focus specifically on an issue that has just been raised by my two colleagues, both ladies, the question of the war we are fighting with climate change, and in particular, sea level rise. And I'm doing this because today, for the first time in the General Assembly, heads of state and government met this morning to consider the issue of sea level rise, which is affecting a large number of countries across the world, not just developing countries. Countries in the global north are also being impacted by sea level rise as a consequence, of course, of glacial melting. Many developing countries, small island developing states, and countries with low-lying coastal areas, as well as LDCs and LLDCs, are living the adverse impacts of sea level rise. This is an existential threat in the purest of senses, because what is at stake is not just the land, the territory of these countries, but also their very lifestyles, their livelihood, their culture, their identity, and their heritage. If countries should lose territory, in fact, there are a number of countries in the Pacific region that have already entered into agreements with third parties, namely Australia, to receive populations in the event that their national territory is inundated. But can you imagine, Joyce Banda was speaking just now about the mental effects of climate change. Can you imagine being forced to leave the land, your ancestral home, on which your forebears may have lived for 500, 1,000 years, developed a culture, and being forced to take refuge in an entirely strange location, what that means psychologically to a human being? The disconnect between the individual, the community, and the land that defined and shaped their culture. And so this is a huge issue. Unhappily, the key problem is that sea level rise is not reversible. And we are going in a direction with climate change that is opposite to the one that we need to be going in, because as you would have read or heard in the media, August 2024 proved to be the hottest year on record that we've had. The Secretary General of the UN speaks no more of global warming. He refers to it as global boiling. And so heads of state and government this morning considered this issue with a view to developing some coordinated global strategy for intervention in the realm of both mitigation and adaptation in order to assist and support the most vulnerable, the small island developing states, the LDCs, and others who are having to deal with this very severe problem. The statistics show that by 2050, as much as 400 million people can be displaced by sea level rise, and that in fact 1 billion human beings on this planet are currently already being affected by sea level rise. Clearly, this is an issue that requires urgent and decisive action on the part of the international community in order to create a new paradigm in terms of how we adjust our lifestyles, our societies to this new reality that is going to define and shape human civilization on this planet for many, many decades ahead. And really, it's quite frightening because no one knows for sure where this will end. It's not just a problem for small islands. It's a problem for large continents. The peninsula of Florida, think of it, impacted. Think of South Florida with all of that investment on the beachfront. Think of the Gulf of Mexico. Think of Guam and islands in the Pacific. This is a serious issue that I think we need to, not just that, there are national security implications as well for all of us because, as we've heard before, sea level rise will generate migration and has already begun to do so, causing tensions. Global food security will be impacted. As arable land gets more scarce, prices in the markets will be impacted. So there are many consequential dimensions to this that we need to start to think about very seriously and come up with a credible, workable, strategic approach to having a concerted global effort to deal with it. And I'd like to thank both my colleagues who spoke before for having raised this, because I think this is going to be one of the defining issues for the next 25 or 30 years, at the very least. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President of General Assembly of the United Nations, for your participation in this very serious discussion. This is one of the most difficult jobs I ever had in my life, to be moderator of the panel of forgotten and not forgotten conflicts, and I have to stop someone who is talking about migrants that are dying right now and the conflicts that are going to destroy the world in the future. I mean, this is a very artificial role I have right now, but please understand me right now when I'm asking my friend Volkan to take a floor and to somehow to summarize what we talked about.
Thank you very much. I congratulate Dennis for his wonderful work during last year, and welcome back to our club of former presidents of the United Nations General Assembly. While other attention is frequently drawn to high-profile conflicts and humanitarian emergencies, many other crises remain in the shadows and neglected and underreported. So I think it is our responsibility to bring these issues to the forefront of our discussions and actions. And it's, I think, wisely on the agenda we're having today, which has never been in an NGIC meeting before. I think first we have to understand the forgotten crisis. These are conflicts and humanitarian situations that, despite their severity, receive little media coverage and international attention. They often occur in regions that are not strategically significant or where geopolitical interests are minimal. As a result, the voices of these people affected are silenced and their sufferings is ignored. I have selected some examples among the many others. One is the Rohingya crisis. The plight of the Rohingya people in Myanmar and Bangladesh has been ongoing for years. And displaced from their homes, they face dire living conditions in overcrowded camps with limited access to healthcare, education, and basic human rights. Despite the scale of their suffering, the crisis has faded from the headlines. As president of the UN General Assembly and during COVID times, when people were afraid even to go out of their homes, I went to Cox's Bazar to visit the Rohingya camps. People were saying that he's crazy. When I went there, they said he's mad. But seeing the 1.5 million people in the worst situation I've ever seen was a lesson I learned from these huge sufferings. What I also understood was there are different peripherics around the camps. One peripheric is the World Food Organization, UN people providing aid to those people. And there's a group of Bangladeshi people who will be very unhappy if those camps are removed. They earn their lives from the camps. And there were 5-star hotels. I said, who's staying there? They said the UN personnel is staying there. So it's a different level of difficulties, hard job, sufferings. But when I talked to the people there, the problem was they can't go back. They are squeezed in that small Cox's Bazar area because they came there being afraid of being killed by the Myanmar authorities. So they were saying, we can't go back. Bangladesh doesn't have the power and possibility to take care of us. What can we do? And the horrible situation in the camps were an example to disaster. The hospital was burned, and the Turkish government constructed a new hospital there. 300 people were bravely working there. Everything needed in the hospital was there, in 10 type of hospitals. And giving birth to children or having operations, anything was there. But the rest of the camp was a disaster. If we continue, the conflict in the Central African Republic, of course, is very important. And this has resulted in widespread violence, displacement, and human rights abuses. And the humanitarian situation remains dire, with millions in need of assistance, yet it struggles to gain the attention it deserves at the global stage. The situation in Yemen cannot be unlisted. While Yemen has received some attention, the scale of the humanitarian crisis is staggering, and millions are on the brink of famine, and the ongoing conflict has devastated the country's infrastructure. The world must not forget the suffering of the Yemeni people. The crisis in South Sudan I have chosen also on my list. Since gaining independence in 2011, South Sudan has faced internal conflict leading to one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. Millions are displaced and the country is plagued by violence, food insecurity, and economic instability. I had the chance also to go to Sudan as the president of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Parliament during al-Bashir time. And I have seen the difference of revenue levels. While people were dying from hunger, I was the guest of the system, and it was like a rich country if you didn't go out of the hotels or the places where you were offered hospitality. And when I came back, the regime was down, and all of the people who were friends of mine as colleagues were in prison or escaped from the country. And the country is now in worse, not better situation, but they are suffering more. And some people are saying if al-Bashir was here, we would have been in a better atmosphere. I mean, that is the unfortunate result of these happenings. I can't stop myself if I don't mention Syria, because I think it's one of the most difficult situations, especially my country has absorbed the biggest part of it. The border between Turkey and Syria was drawn according to the train line, and the train passes through the cities. South of the city became Syria, north of the city became Turkey. So the citizens, people living in the south became Syrian citizens, north became Turkish citizens. So when this killing of the Syrian population started, they immediately went to join their families or their people from their same town. So we had 5 million in Turkey all of a sudden. Some went to Europe, some went to Canada, some went elsewhere, but 5 million people we are looking after. I just want to explain to you how difficult it is. They were first in the camps. People who didn't have money went to the camps. And I think we are proud to establish the best camps for refugees all over. But people with money didn't go to the camps, and they went to either to find their own way of life or went to join their families. And just to explain how difficult it is, we had at that moment 700,000 children who needed education, and we decided to give them education in Syrian curriculum. So the primary schools in the morning was Turkish schools, in the afternoon they were Syrian schools. And we had 75,000 Syrian teachers just to give education in their own culture and language, so that when they had a chance to go back to their country, they shouldn't go back with a gap of less education and forgetting their own languages. But the situation is the same as in Bangladesh or with the Rohingya Muslims, because they escaped being afraid of being killed. So for them to go back, they have to have security, otherwise they won't go back. So what we have done was we established a security corridor and kept another 5 million in Syria. If we hadn't established that corridor, another 5 million was coming not only to Turkey, but also to other parts of the world. So in practice, 10 million people is out of their places and facing difficulties. The neglect of these crises has severe consequences, I have said. So when conflicts are forgotten, humanitarian aid is also delayed. And this suffering of innocent civilians continue unabated. Children are deprived of education, families are torn apart, and communities are left to fend for themselves. So I was thinking of what kind of actions can we take. As I think global citizens, we have a moral obligation to address these forgotten crises. First, perhaps we must raise awareness, and we must use our platforms, whether in media, academia, or civil society, to raise awareness about these crises. By sharing stories and amplifying the voices of those affected, we can bring attention to their plight and mobilize support. Second, perhaps, is advocating for policy change. We need to advocate for our governments and international organizations to prioritize forgotten crises in their foreign policy agendas. This includes increasing humanitarian aid, supporting peace-building efforts, and holding accountable those responsible for human rights abuses. Another action could be supporting local organizations. Local NGOs and community groups often have their best understanding of the needs on the ground, and supporting their efforts can lead to more effective and sustainable solutions. We must invest in local capacities and empower communities to take charge of their own recovery. And encouraging media coverage, I think, is important because media plays a crucial role in shaping public perception and policy. So we must encourage journalists to cover forgotten crises and provide them with the resources and support needed to tell these important stories. Fostering international cooperation is important, and addressing forgotten crises requires a coordinated international response. We must work together, governments, NGOs, and the private sector, to create comprehensive strategies that address the root causes of conflict and support long-term stability. In conclusion, the forgotten crises and conflicts of our time demand our attention and action. We cannot allow the suffering of millions to go unnoticed. It is our collective responsibility to shine a light on these issues, advocate for those in need, and work towards sustainable solutions. Before I hand back the microphone, I have to also say a few words about Ehud Barak's interpretation of what's going on in Gaza. As a Turkish citizen, I would have spoken differently, but I'm a person who looks at things objectively. So what I'm going to say is the attack of Hamas on innocent people on the 7th of October is bad and unacceptable. It has created a lot of problems for all over the world. But the second stage was called disproportionate reaction. And that was a correct wording for that time. But today, we can't say disproportionate reaction. We can use the term massacre instead of genocide, because 40,000 people has been killed. And the result of these killings would be for the future, these people who has perhaps lost their families, who has lost their children, who has lost somebody from their neighborhood, will have less chance of surviving in the world. And so we can expect them, people who has lost everything, could easily become terrorists in the future. And that is my fear, because they are not allowed to be incorporated in the world system. They are not having enough education, enough health care. They have lost their families, and I think this will be with us for a while. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Volkan. Mr. Soleri was asking me for 2 minutes to explain a few things about conflict between India and Pakistan in Kashmir, two nuclear powers. But unfortunately, I cannot fulfill, Mr. Soleri, my promise, because the organizers are asking me to finish this panel. Just a few things to underline once again. I think that we as a multilateral system, we are facing with a challenge, because we don't have instruments to prevent conflicts. We are much more capable to go somewhere where conflict is existing and where we are stopping conflict by implementing a kind of power. But prevention of conflict is much more important, and we have to think about that. I'm always underlining such importance. Second, the world nowadays, where the big powers are functioning in a very specific, how it works. The world is functioning when big powers are pushing governments to find a fast solution. Very often, the fast solution means there is no compromise. one side is getting everything, the other side is losing everything, which is a containing trauma, once again, and which is producing new conflicts in the future. This is not functioning. This is not functioning anymore. The process of humiliation is extremely dangerous. This is the book which is written by Dominique Moissy, which is describing effectively what's going on with the frustrated countries and the countries that are suffering because of trauma. One trauma is generating other trauma. And someone was said here that we have maybe a first-class conflict and second-class conflict, which means that we probably have first-class victims and second-class victims, which is extremely dangerous. But this is unfortunately the way how things are functioning nowadays, and we have to take all this into the consideration seriously. Unfortunately, we have to stop right now. I think that can be a very interesting panel. Maybe next time we can spend more time to think about those things, even to prevent conflicts. We cannot mention all existing conflicts and all potential conflicts between states and between entities, and also men and women, and also some other conflicts, but this is one of the most traumatic panels I ever participated in. Thank you very much.
It's the same thing.
Pause 3 minutes. 10 minutes coffee break. Okay.
Coffee break is the back of the room, so those who want to bring their coffee and come back will be more than welcome. Before we start on the gender issues,